about how to proceed in the future. In view of the other parties, of course, we will talk with the FDP, but also with the Greens. But I also want to add also with the SPD, because I think it is important that Germany has a stable and good government. I heard the SPDs and what they said, but we should remain in contact, and we believe unanimously that we should do this also in the Bureau. And then we talked about the next elections in less than 3 weeks. That is in Lower Saxony for the federal state parliament there. And we will there build on yesterday's result and try also to have good results in those elections so that Mr. Altmann will be Prime Minister of Lower Saxony. So we had very dense discussion today. We had light but also shadow, of course, and but were very constructive about it. And the atmosphere was the idea that we have responsibility for the future of our country without pretending things were better than they were. Mrs. Dunst, please. Mrs. Dunst, please. Thank you. Chancellor, the CSU still is talking about capping refugee influx, and without the CSU, Jamaica would not be possible. And the SPD has excluded the Grand Coalition. How much will you try to avoid new elections? And what about the coalition agreements? Of course, I will talk to the CSU, and I am still optimistic that we'll come to solutions. We will act in a common approach. That is out of the question, and we'll have a common suggestion for the chair of the parliamentary group. So I am positive and optimistic, and we have some talks, and before we've even entered into talks, I can't give you an answer as to how successful they will be. We all believe that all parties, anyway, those with which we could go into coalition from our point of view, do have a responsibility so that we can form a stable government. Please, the next question. Chancellor, I would like to know whether after such an election outcome, your party would need a kind of renewal, a new orientation, new establishment with new people or new contents. And I'd also like to know whether anybody in the Bureau mentioned this. We didn't talk about positions apart from Volker Kauder being the chair of the parliamentary group. We will, of course, talk about the concrete issues, the topics moving the people, and we talked about a broad area of topics. It's not just refugees and integrating them and combating the reasons for migration, the social situation, but also other topics, for example, rural areas where people sometimes have the feeling that they have been left behind. And in our manifesto, we had already focused on this, and we will do this more so in the future. And we will talk about the necessary steps, which is why we will have our meeting, but after the elections in Lower Saxony. Mr. Ders, please. Chancellor, a question on your future European policy. Now, AfD and FDP are two parties who are critical of Europe. One of them might become part of your government soon. So what kind of an impact will that have on your EU course, and how far will you be able to move forward to Mr. Macron in financial and Eurozone policies? Well, the topics, of course, the topic of Europe will, of course, play a role in our consultations with the parties. And Europe is now in a phase where we have to think about deepening or other kinds of programmatic courses. The French president will tomorrow give a speech on this. I don't want to exclude anything or anybody. I don't want to draw any red lines. I'll just say what makes sense. Whatever makes sense will be supported by the Union, by the CDU-CSU. We do need more Europe, but we also need more competitiveness, more jobs. The European Union must be stronger, which is why it's not about buzzwords, but what is behind them. And I agree on this I talk about this with the French president, but this is not the day to say this will be possible and this won't be possible. And first of all, we'll have to talk with the FDP about this. Mr. Fatis, please. Mrs. Merkel, you just said that you want to win back the AfD voters. How large a share do you believe of these people can you reach? How do you want to do it? Will the CDU move towards the right, as Mr. Seehofer insinuated yesterday? And will you try to gain people from the current AfD parliamentary group? That would be the first possibility you had. Mrs. Petri today left, so maybe you could choose the... No, that's absolutely not what I intend to do. But I did say that with the current analysis, 1 million CDU-CSU voters, last time's voters went to the AfD, but also many non-voters because we have a higher voter turnout this time. And we're trying to win over these voters with doing good politics and solving problems. Please, next question. Oh. To quote it more exactly, we weren't talking about a shift towards the right, but just the right flank. Mr. Herman said that today. I would put it differently, in my own wording. Where problems occur, we will solve these problems, and those are questions of integration, of illegal migration, but also issues like having enough doctors in rural areas, or having public transport, or how many opportunities people in farmers and agricultural landscapes have, because that's where my constituency is, and I know that there are many problems there, and so there are very many reasons for a kind of a protest vote, which we have seen with some of the AfD voters. And I think by solving the problems, we could be successful. A question from the Swedish television on foreign and European policy. With the AfD as the third strongest force in German Bundestag, will that have an impact on the European and foreign and migration policy of Germany? No, I don't believe that. I believe that the parties who can go into coalition will find solutions, search for them. There are some differences of opinion between the Union and the Greens, the CDU-CSU and the FDP, and in part also the SPD. And of course, we will find that then in the coalition agreements, depending on how they end. That will be reflected in there, but the AfD will not have an impact on that. Next question. Danish television, another Scandinavian country. During the election campaign, we saw lots of anger and hate, feelings also directed against you personally. How do you deal with that? And what do you intend to do to stop this anger and this hate? I think the most important thing is to address the people who want to listen to these kinds of meetings, not those who just come to whistle or to shout. That you give these people, make them an offer, and it can't be that you say, no, I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to address them. You have to, but then you also have to directly address them, and otherwise I just have to accept that there are some people who don't want to listen at the moment. That's also part of democracy, and you'll have to be able to endure it as it is. Mr. Ziedler, please. Here to the right. Yeah, now I can see you. I would like to ask, yesterday, last night, in this so-called elephant round, you said that the Chancellor is always responsible. Have you also asked yourself about your own role or thought about personal consequences? I thought very hard about things last autumn, and it was not an easy decision to be a candidate again. And although I am dissatisfied with yesterday's result, I must say that we've been in the government for 12 years now, and we've been leading the government, and that is a very long time. And of course, it is not written in stone that after 12 years you will be voted into government again, which is why I think we have to be a little bit humble towards the voters, especially as if you think that the last legislative period was a very difficult one. And I must say that this was, and I have said it, a very special campaign, and there were lots of attacks from the left side, but also from the right side of the political spectrum. And we've never had a campaign like this before. And the fact that these are true attacks has been proved right. I was prepared for this, which is why I believe that the question of a personal decision was a strong question then, much more than now. Now we have a clear mandate, and I thank the voters who voted us in, because we are by far the strongest force. Although we're disappointed, there are, I think, nearly 12% difference with the Social Democrats. When I was voted in for the first time as a Chancellor, it was less than 1% difference. So I have a commitment towards these voters, but I also feel confirmed in what I was thinking about in the autumn of 2016. And yes, there is some polarization, and yes, it is also directed at me as a person, but nevertheless, and I have repeated this over the past campaigning weeks, I do believe that the basic decisions which were made, and for which I am responsible, even if I didn't make them on my own, but as a Chancellor, of course, I am responsible. I believe that these decisions were correct, but nevertheless, since then, we have moved on. I think that the EU-Turkey agreement is correct. Fighting migration causes is also correct. We have a new situation, but we've got lots to do yet. Jensen, RT International Chancellor. And how much do you see the losses of the CDU-CSU as your personal losses as a federal chancellor? Well, I tried to answer this question just now. We have lost voters to the AfD, and I said that we will fight to get them back. And that has to do with the current situation, and the topics haven't been satisfactorily answered by us, obviously, for the voters. And of course I have a responsibility as a Chancellor, but I also have a responsibility for the voters who voted for me. So now we have a mandate and we'll have to go into it. And we have 1.3 million voters we lost to the FDP. Something similar happened in 2009. And that was a kind of a signal that people wanted the grand coalition to end. I think that many of these people hoped that then the CDU and CSU and FDP would be strong enough to go into coalition. Jamaica is another story altogether, but that also played into this, which is why I said that when solving problems, we will concentrate on those people who left us for the AfD. Mr. Fried, please.
Madam Chancellor, you just said that those voters who now voted the AfD, you want to win them back by good policy. after the federal state elections in 2016, we heard it again and again. Obviously, you haven't made any progress on this, because otherwise there wouldn't be 1 million people who voted for the AfD. Now, second question to you, how can you explain the figures of the CDU in the past weeks? The SPD reproaches you of being responsible for this because you didn't really enter into a debate with the SPD. Well, first of all, I can only say Julia Klöckner, for instance, reported today that there is a difference between those who voted AfD in North Rhine-Westphalia today or yesterday and 1 year ago. Doesn't mean that the AfD is not still strong there, but you can't solve all the problems in this very short period of time. Secondly, on the issue of opinion polls which changed in the course of time. Well, I think given the television duel, and this was said by many today, we had a situation all of a sudden where people didn't talk about who should be chancellor, but who will be the third strongest party. It is legitimate, of course, that the SPD used this. And I think we had the situation that we said whether the CDU will get 1 vote more or less, it really doesn't depend on this. It's rather important that there will be a change in the landscape. I said that most hoped for a government formed of the CDU and the Liberals. Apart from that, I won't look into such an analysis for ages about when happened, what exactly, on what day, etc. From my point of view, the situation changed after the television duel, and I don't really see that I wasn't willing to enter into a debate. And even after the result of the election, I think that it is better to have meetings between the top candidates than just duels between the two top candidates. Apart from that, there were a lot of other television formats. Mrs. Acker, and well, to me, in any case, it was easy to mention and to talk about the differences compared to the SPD and vice versa. I think the SPD didn't have any problems talking about what they wanted to do differently. But if I'm responsible for that now, well, before the general elections, several political parties said that there are certain conditions that they wanted to see fulfilled so as to be part of the government. You yourself didn't mention any conditions for the CDU. Regarding your party, what are the essentials where at the end of the day you have to say, or you will say, they have to be accepted after the coalition negotiates? Well, we started to talk about this today, but we have not concluded the talks, and we hold the talks especially together with the CSU. But you can assume that a sound budget is very important, of course, or the issue of inner security are important issues for the CDU. Madam Chancellor, this general election is kind of a breaking point because since Franz Josef Strauss, or as he said, we do have a democratically legitimate party right of the CDU. When dealing with the AfD during the past years, do you think that you chose the right strategy? Some said we don't even talk to AfD politicians. We do not want to be in touch. We simply will remain silent when they are present. Do you think that mistakes were made? Because based on such an analysis, you can struggle and fight to win back the voters who voted for AfD now. I think it is the best way to deal with this by solving the problems which are important for the people. And there are some problems that are genuine problems that need to be solved. And then at another point, you also need to say where there are the limits of what we accept. We will have stark discrepancies with the AfD, of course. The question whether we will go to discussion rounds where AfD politicians are involved. Well, this question has been answered already. Chancellor, do you have an explanation today For the election campaign in the east of Germany, there were harsh protests against you, and we also saw the election result of the AfD in East Germany. They are very close to the CDU party. Secondly, what is your explanation for the bad result of the CDU? This is especially due to the bad result of the CSU in Bavaria. I believe as far as the new federal states are concerned, people are concerned. They feel that they lose things, be it because of globalization, because they need to share with refugees. I think this is what we find here above all. But it has been reported from North Rhine-Westphalia that there are social hotspots there as well, where we have similar high percentage points for the AfD, and the CDU will analyze this, of course. I do not have an explanation today. Today I look into the analysis of the CDU and not CSU, and we do have this responsibility, of course. Chancellor, I'd like to ask you to look back onto the election campaign against the backdrop of the swing of voters to the AfD and the election results. Very specifically, you as the candidate for the Chancellery and the CDU, what did you do wrong? What should you have done differently? Well, I can't see what we should do differently now. I thought through this election campaign very well. I did it the way I wanted to do it, and one day after the elections, I don't think that I changed my opinion compared to yesterday or a couple of weeks ago. So this is why I mentioned the autumn of 2016. I knew back then that it would be a difficult election campaign, and well, I think I never mentioned the word contestation or contesting things before, but I know that after the major challenge we had at the end of 2015, at the beginning of 2016, we still have a lot of discussions about illegal immigration towards Libya. But then there is the situation in some social hotspots in rural areas, in the old federal states of the West as well. Not all the problems have been solved there. And this resulted in the fact that the AfD could win quite some votes. This is why I would like to repeat it yet again. In the future, I will try not to always talk about the others. But we can see our own homework, which we have to do, and we will do our own homework. And globalization will mean that we will have homework again and again. And I don't pretend that we can create our own ideal world where the euro is still stable, a world where there was never a financial crisis, never any refugee. No, tasks might always be ahead of us, of course, tasks which are not directly linked to us, but tasks which also affect us because of globalization. We must be ready to solve these problems according to our underlying manifesto and program. And we must not complain about a new task. Politics means that you need to think about your decisions and solve problems. And very often we spoke about September 2015. If I look at this decision and at the alternatives, for example, to use water cannons at the German borders, then it is still my conviction it was difficult, but as a bottom line, this was the best answer. The way we acted, it was the best answer. But still, it is a task where I suppose a lot of people say it would have been good if we hadn't experienced it, if there would never have been any civil war in Syria. Channel 4 News from the UK. Mrs. Merkel, before the election and after Brexit and Trump, you were called a pillar of stability in Europe. After the election results, I would like to know whether you are such a pillar of stability. Well, you said yourself that some people called me this. Others need to decide what I am. I will continue being interested in these topics, but I myself didn't write these articles about myself. Sorry? But you want to be the pillar of stability. Well, Well, just one day before the elections, I said, I want to serve Germany according to my best knowledge and conscience, and thus I will also serve the stability of Europe. And this is how I will be involved, and well, then you need to decide for yourselves. I come from the Italian press. A question to you. I went to the eastern parts very often recently, and I heard from many people, not only AfD supporters, that people said Mrs. Merkel comes from East Germany, but she completely forgot East Germany. I wanted to ask you, what would you reply to these people? Well, my constituency is in the so-called East, that is in Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania. Well, the circumstances are not easy. Yet, I was able to win this constituency. I'm very grateful to the voters there. This is a great support for me. And this is why I can rightfully claim that I've not forgotten the people there. But maybe many got the impression, also against the backdrop of the many international problems, that I wasn't daily in touch with them, not the way they had wished for. I always tried to underline that we're in favor of a stable euro, protecting the outer borders, partnership with Africa. All this also means to support the people in East Germany, to support stability. But maybe they want to talk to me in their regions more often. I tried to do a lot during the election campaign, especially in my home federal state in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. I went to regions where I used to go to not very often, and I felt that some people feel forgotten and that they should wish for us to listen to them more closely. Well, but we were able to win this constituency, which was possibly problematic.
If there be another humanitarian crisis in Syria or somewhere else in the world, are you willing to open your borders once again like you did in 2015?
Well, first of all, we didn't open the borders, but they were open. 400,000 refugees had come to Germany by September. Secondly, I believe that I can say that this will not repeat itself because we work with the UN, we fund the UN properly, we found a deal with Turkey, we help the coastal border control in Libya, and I think we did everything to avoid that there will be a repetition of this situation. And we also fight traffickers because they support mafia-like structures. They endanger people, and then they earn a lot of money for their dealings. And all this needs to be fought against. We need more development aid, more economic business contacts. We need to build stronger structures. I think this is the right answer, and this is why I think this will not repeat itself. Madam Chancellor, against the backdrop of the election result, do you stick to your statement that you will be head of government for the next 4 years? And another question, what about the relationship with your sister party, the CSU? In the morning, it looked like that maybe you should do and enter into exploratory talks with Mr. Seehofer. Well, I'm in touch with Mr. Seehofer. We'll continue to be in touch, of course. And apart from the fact I didn't express my statement on the 4 years, this didn't depend on the percentage points. Of course, this statement is still true, it's still valid. If I were re-elected as a chancellor, we need to see, but in any case, we've got the clear mandate to form a government. It doesn't mean that anything has changed. I didn't say I will be available only if we get 35 or 40%. I simply said I will be available. I work for the French press. You will meet your European colleagues in Tallinn in some weeks. You will be curious, or they will be curious, when to expect a new government. Can you possibly give them a beginning of an answer? And when do you expect the first preliminary talks exploring a possible coalition? Well, I can give the answer that on Thursday I will not be able to give an answer to my colleagues, and maybe Mark Rutte will give my answer later. The Netherlands have not formed a government either so far. So I'm not the most urgent or pressing case, if I can put it like this. Secondly, I will assure my colleagues that Germany acts responsibly now in the transitional phase and will act responsibly. Apart from that, I cannot give you any deadlines. We will have federal state elections in 3 weeks' time. We'll definitely hold talks before that, but it has to mature. Good afternoon. I work for Sky News in Italy. Supposedly, you will be Chancellor for the first time. What does power mean to you? To me, this means that I can shape and create, that I can not only criticize, which is something you can do just greatly in opposition, but that I can also shape and create. That means that you always know that this can bring about progress, but might also have some deficiencies, of course, and it is linked to a great deal of responsibility. But I am pleased to accept this because I like this job. Easy question. Do you look forward to the next 4 years, also given the many difficult talks you're going to have to hold?